Again, as promised today, I'll do a short session, or not that short actually, an info session on health insurance, and I'll focus on the different types of health insurance. So I'll help you understand the overall system here in Germany and mainly what the difference between public and private insurance is. Because I know that this is a topic a lot of you struggle with. If you're an international, you have to decide on which insurance to go for often before you come here, because you need a proof of insurance when you apply for a visa. So that's one situation where we always often get questions about the overall insurance setup. And then also probably you're an international who already is in Germany, maybe you're working here and thinking about switching to a different insurance. So I'll help you understand the overall system a bit better and compare the two types of insurance. So let's start. First of all, I think what's really important to understand is that health insurance is mandatory for everyone in Germany. That's defined by law. And that's also why you need a proof of health insurance when you come here. Otherwise, you will not be allowed to enter the country, or you won't even get a visa. And also, for instance, if you're a student here, your university will ask for a health insurance certificate when you hand in your enrollment documents. So that's defined by law. I think that's a very good system because everyone gets equal medical treatment, and if you have to go to the hospital or something, that will usually be covered. But let me go into detail on what this actually means. In general, we have two different kinds of insurance. As I already said, we have public insurance providers and we have private insurance providers. So just as a basic understanding, we often get questions about which health services are actually covered in this insurance and how it differs between the two insurances. So just to keep it really, really simple, I can tell you that standard medical care is always covered over here, no matter which insurance you go for, because that's defined by law. If you look at numbers, I think more than or almost 90% of the population here has a public insurance. So it's a system which works well. And this insurance covers all the basic medical care you need. If you need to go for checkups, or if you are feeling sick and you need to go and see a doctor, that will be covered by your insurance. Also, if you have a public one, but of course that's the same if you have a private insurance. The main difference is that if you have a public insurance, you don't have to do an advance payment when you go to the doctor. So you go and see a doctor, and then the doctor bills your treatment directly to your insurance provider. So you're not involved in this unless you've taken a treatment which is not covered by basic insurance. But as I mentioned, the basic treatments and whatever you need is usually covered. If you go for a private insurance, treatments are usually invoiced to you, and you will get a reimbursement from your insurance. Usually this works quite fast depending on the insurance you have chosen, but that's something you have to keep in mind because you need some cash and some cash flow going through your bank account to be able to cover that. So that's one basic difference. If you look at public insurances, there are different providers. We have a few big names. I mean, if you Google them, if you Google public insurance in Germany, you will get a few of the providers. I'm not going into detail on that. But if you compare them, they are mainly the same in the services covered, because as I said, it's just defined by law. So they all have to cover the same. So the scope of services they cover, 90% of the scope is exactly the same. There are some slight differences in terms of additional treatment. So for instance, if you want to go for a homeopathic treatment, some of the public insurances do cover that or cover small amounts of that. Same goes for sports classes, for instance. Some of them cover some bonus programs or something, and some of them don't. So that's where you can look into the details. Also when it comes to dental stuff and so on. With private insurance, usually you will get more coverage depending on the package you have chosen. So there's a lot of difference and variation depending on the package you go for. So for instance, if it's really important for you to have alternative medicine like homeopathy, then it probably makes sense to look into a private insurance or into an extra insurance. You can also go for public insurance and then have an add-on to pay extra, because public insurance will usually not pay for homeopathic treatment. But that's just one example. But if you don't have any like special kind of medicine you want to go for, as I said, basic treatment is always taken care of no matter which service you go for. If you need to go to a hospital, if you have an emergency, this will always be taken care of and you don't have to worry about the bills. Then main question, does this matter, right? Does it matter to you? Can you actually choose between public and private health insurance? So that's a very complex, kind of complex system over here in Germany, because not everyone can choose. So as I said, 90% of our population has a public insurance, and there's a reason for that. I mean, it works well, but on top of that, public insurance is open for everyone. This also means that the public insurers cannot make any difference when accepting people. So if you apply as a member to a public insurance, they always have to give you admission. They cannot say that, okay, maybe your health status is too risky for us or it costs us too much money or anything. They have to accept you. So public insurance is open for everyone. And private insurance is a bit different. So in private insurance, the admission depends on your gross income if you're an employee. So you have to fulfill a certain level of yearly gross income. At the moment, that's more than 60,000 euros per year gross income. It will probably, or I think it will go up a little next year. So this is the status 2019. If you want to have details on that, I think it makes sense to Google it. And also if you want to understand the whole salary calculation aspect a bit more, you can check out my video on salary calculation. I think that will be of help. I'll insert a link here and you can just click on it. So, as I mentioned, private insurance is not accessible for everyone. There are a few exceptions, of course. So, civil servants usually have a separate insurance. So, that's something we will not look at today. Students can actually choose, but as a student, it really depends on your overall situation. But you can go for private insurance, even if you have, of course, you will have a lower income than 60,000 euros, but you can still get access to it. Self-employed persons have a choice, so they don't have to go use public insurance. They can also go for private insurance. This group is actually, I would say, the only group which has a free choice, it's a matter of personal decision. I'll help you understand a bit better how the fees are calculated, because that's why it matters, and that's also why there's this income barrier for private insurance. So how much do I have to pay for health insurance? That's something which matters to, I think, almost everyone. Main question. So public insurance, here the fee is dependent on your gross income. So if you have a low income, you will pay a lower fee. If you have a high income, you will pay a higher fee. And that's why if you look at private insurance, there's this income barrier, because that's a different system. So fee dependent on your gross income, but there is a maximum income which is considered. So we call it assessment ceiling. It's a very German word, Beitragsbemessungsgrenze. So if you earn more than approximately 55,000 as of 2019, that's the maximum gross income which is taken into account as a consideration for the fee you have to pay. If you earn more than that, it will not be taken into consideration when calculating your fee. So in detail, if you look at it, as an employee, you have to pay 14.6% of your gross income as health insurance. So that's the kind of deduction you face. Usually there will be 1 or 2% added by your insurance. So 14.6 is the current amount defined as per law. That's what the health insurances are allowed to charge, and they can add another 1 or 2%. So this varies depending on the insurance you go for. It's not such a high amount if you look at the variation, but usually it's 1 or 2%. I usually calculate with 15.5% on average. So that's it's an approximate average you get if you look at different public insurances. So if you look at those 15%, half of that is covered by your employer. So as I mentioned earlier, I've done a detailed video on salary calculation. If you want to learn more about it, I really recommend you to check it out. So you have to pay approximately 15% of your gross income as an employee, but only half of that has to be covered by you. And that's deducted from your salary right away. If you're self-employed, it's the same, but there's a slight difference. You have a monthly minimum fee, and the monthly minimum fee is approximately 160 euros. It's not a fixed minimum fee, but they actually take a fictitious minimum income of approximately a bit more than 1,000 euros a month. And they say that, okay, even if you earn less than that, I think, and more than 450 euros, we will, even if you earn 1,000 euros, we will still apply more than 1,000 euros as a minimum income. So the minimum fee you always end up with is 160 euros monthly, and that's an amount which was lowered. So in earlier years it used to be more, so it has already been lowered, but you have to take this into account, and the entire fee has to be covered by you, because you don't have an employer which covers half of that, right? So yeah, you have to keep that in mind. If you're a self-employed person, there are some things you have to consider. So I really recommend you to look at it in detail and then decide whether you want to go for public or private insurance. Students, the fee depends a bit on your age. So if you're 30 plus, you face the same minimum fee as a self-employed person does. So approximately 160 euros. If you are below 30, you can pay a reduced amount. So that currently it amounts to approximately 90 euros. But that's the basic fee you will have to pay. And that's the same for every public insurance, as I said. So those fees for public insurance are defined by law. You won't find any difference between different public insurances, also with basic medical care. So the only difference you can find is regarding maybe service. If you have a question, maybe they do have an English-speaking hotline or not. And also some, bonus programs and everything. So that's the only part where you will find a variation between public insurances. So that's something you should take into account. For students, I think below 25, you can also go for a family insurance, something we have not included here because family insurance only applies if you have a family here. For instance, if your parents are living here and if they have an insurance, and if you are below 25, you can be part of their insurance and you don't have to pay any extra fee for that. Also, if you are married, that's something you can take into account. Family insurance is a separate topic which we have not taken into account here. But important note, if you're married or if you have kids or if you have parents here, you should Google that. And maybe we can do a video on that sometime as well. But just as a general rule, I think most of you are probably employees. Keep in mind approximately 15% of your gross income has to go into health insurance. So that was it about public insurance in terms of costs. Now, private insurance is a bit different. For private insurance, you pay a fixed fee, irrelevant how much you earn. Even if you earn 200,000 euros, the amount will still be the same. And the amount depends on the selected insurance package. Of course, the selected insurance in general, you can find a lot of cost differences. Then the package you have chosen, you will, for instance, see a variation in the deductible amount. So the amount you pay yourself or you have to cover before you get a reimbursement. So it can be anything between, I think, €0 up to, I think, about €1,000 deductible amount, which has to be covered by you yearly, actually. So depending on that, your tariff, your monthly tariff will be higher or lower. Then what they also take into account is your age at the time of joining. Because that's part of their risk calculation, and of course your health conditions. So you will probably have to have some confirmations from your doctor on medical checkups. So, but that depends on the insurance you go for. So the younger you are, the lower the fee usually is. And that's why earlier I showed you that, okay, there has to be a minimum income for private insurance, because it's a fixed fee. And this fixed fee is also there if you have a low income. So if you go for private insurance, and usually you will pay some amount between 300 to 500 euros per month. That's just an average amount depending on the insurance. If you go for private insurance, you will have to pay this monthly fee, irrelevant how much you earn. So if you end up being unemployed, you will still have to pay for that. And that's different if you have a public insurance. If you have a very low income, then the fee you pay on a monthly basis is much lower, right? So for instance, if you are self-employed, the maximum fee you will pay if you have a very low income is €160. If you have a private insurance, even if you have a very low income, you will still end up paying this 300 to 500 euros a month. But then if you look at it from a different perspective, if you have a very high income, your public insurance can go up to, I think, 700 euros approximately, and private insurance usually amounts anything between 300 to 500 euros, and has a lot of extra coverage for dental treatments or vision aids, like for instance glasses like the ones I have, or naturopathic kind of treatments won't have to be paid separately by you depending on your treatment. So that's something you have to just keep in mind when you decide on which insurance you go for. We have come up with a bit of an overview to make it easier for you to decide. I won't give you a definite recommendation on what to go for, because it really depends on your personal situation. But if we go through it, let's say excess is one category. If you compare it, as I said, public insurance is open for everyone, irrelevant of your health status and so on. Private insurance is different. It's only open to certain income groups or persons who are self-employed. And then they can also deny access if your health status is too risky for them. So if you have a chronic disease, for instance, or if you already if you're very sensitive and you already had a lot of diseases or whatsoever, they can decide not to accept you. So that's a matter of decision for private insurance. In terms of coverage, as I said, standard health insurance services don't vary that much, but basic coverage is there. So I think that's a big difference to other countries in the world. You will always get good or sufficient medical treatment with a standard public health insurance. If you have a private insurance, you often get prioritized treatment. So the amount of time you spend waiting when you go to a doctor is less. You probably have a bit more choice between treatments, and the overall treatment would just be a bit more, let's say, premium service. But in general, I mean, our health services over here are good, so you don't have to worry about it, no matter whether you're public or private in terms of insurance. If it's important for you to have special treatments like naturopathic treatment or other things, then it makes sense to look into the details and think about an additional insurance or a private insurance depending on your income situation. And then also depending on the amount of time you spend in Germany. Because as I said, additional services in public insurance, usually they're not covered. They can be added with an extra insurance. Private is the same, but if you choose a good package with a good insurance, then usually there will be a lot of the extra services will be covered, and you can even get refunds for your glasses and some medicines and so on. So the main variation or difference lies in terms of cost, and that's why I said I won't give you a recommendation what's best for you, because it depends on your income and your overall situation. So public insurance costs about 15 or a bit more than 15% of your gross income, and private insurance has a fixed fee, which can be lower than the amount you pay for public insurance, depending on your income situation. So if you have a very stable, high income and you know that you won't end up unemployed or with a low income in the next years, or also if you are planning to spend a very fixed time or just a very fixed amount of time in Germany, maybe 2-3 years, and then you'll go back to another country or whatever, then it probably makes sense to go for private insurance, but it depends. Employer contribution, I think that's an important aspect. So public insurance, 50% is covered by your employer and you don't have to worry about it. And also this whole fee is deducted from your salary right away. If you have a private insurance, 50% of it is covered by your employer as well, but there's a maximum amount. So the maximum is 352 euros. But this doesn't mean the total fee, but half. So if your total fee is 400 euros, then of course it will only cover 200 euros. So that's just to understand it. But usually if you go for a private insurance, you won't end up paying 700 euros for your tariff. So yeah, but 50% is covered. One really, really important factor, and that's why it matters, and that's why it makes sense to invest time in researching this if you're planning here to stay here on long term, or if you have a family and so on. If you have a public insurance, you can always decide to go for private insurance, depending, I mean, of course, unless they don't accept you, but in general, the change is always possible if you get a high income or something else changes. If you have a private insurance, changing back to public insurance is very, very difficult. So because in Germany we have a strong social security system, and the system survives because people pay their monthly deductions and so on. And if you decide to leave the system and go into a private insurance, then the state makes it very difficult for you to go back because you have decided to leave the system. So there are only very certain factors where they make an exception and you can change back from private to public insurance. It's possible, but the whole legal framework keeps changing, so I won't give you any advice on that because I'm not a lawyer and I cannot give any recommendations on that. But that's something you have to keep in mind. So if you go for private insurance, changing to public insurance can be very difficult. If you are a student, there might be options, but apart from that, it's very, very difficult. And that's something you have to keep in mind because it also affects your family situation. So if you have a public insurance, as I mentioned earlier, you can go for family insurance. If you have a spouse or if you have children, so if you have a spouse and the other person doesn't have any income, you can have a joint insurance and only one of you pays for it. If you have kids, your kids will have a free insurance until a certain age, as I mentioned earlier. If you have a private insurance, everyone has to pay a separate fee, irrelevant of your marital status and irrelevant of your kid's age. So the minute you have a kid or a child, you will have to pay a separate insurance fee for that. So the overall calculation should include this as well. If you are planning to stay here on long term, it really is a decision which affects you for several years to come, or for the whole kind of lifetime you spend here, unless you find a way to change it. So that's the main reason why it makes sense to invest time. So if you are part of a group which takes into consideration changing into private insurance, you should spend some time on researching this and calculating the overall amount and risk and so on. it can make sense, but you should invest some time in doing this. Yeah, so I hope this was helpful for you. This was just a rough overview. As I mentioned, I know I keep saying that in all of my videos, it's complex. There are a lot of things to keep in mind. And that's why I'll do another session on health insurance, and I'll focus a bit more on students, because probably you have a part-time job, or planning to go for a part-time job and so on. And there are some details you have to keep in mind in terms of health insurance to understand the kind of cost you are facing. So that's something I'm going to cover in my next session. And if that's something you're interested in, then stay tuned. Also, if you have other questions, or if you would like me to cover another topic, just leave us a comment and we will definitely try to cover that. So yeah, thank you for listening, and I hope this was helpful for you, and see you next time.